To the west was a mighty ocean. People had been told great riches lay across the heaving waters. It was 1607, and 104 English men and boys arrived in North America to start a settlement. In May of that year, they settled on a protected site, planting the flag of England, claiming the land in the name of King James, and they called it Jamestown. The Europeans had arrived again. For more than 40 years earlier, in 1565, the Spanish had arrived. They called their landing place St. Augustine. The first settlement, the oldest in what is now the United States, but our British heritage has blurred that part of our history. Just 3 years after the founding of Jamestown, the Spanish would set up a city in the desert Southwest and call it Santa Fe. Back to the British. In the fall of 1620, 13 years after Jamestown, another group of 100 or so braved the Atlantic in the Mayflower. They called themselves the Pilgrims. They set foot in the New World on the shores of Cape Cod. 4 centers of a new civilization coexisting in America, but none really knew about the others. During the 150 years that the settlements grew and retreated and grew again until the early 1700s, the New England they had built began to look very much like the old country. The citizens of this new world, except for those under Spanish control, thought of themselves as proper English, protected by the crown, having their own governments. It would be in those 13 local centers of debate that the seeds of liberty would be sown and the discussions of independence would become heated. King George III's government had been wallowing in debt because of its global adventures. It had spent tons of money protecting the colonies from the real owners of their property, native peoples who had allied themselves with Britain's traditional enemy, France. They saw it as repayment for the aid they had given in defeating the French and Native Americans. But the new British on this side of the Atlantic had long thought that they were the ones who had the power to make laws and impose taxes. Taxation without representation became the rallying cry as more and more taxes were imposed, some on everything from postage stamps to playing cards. The colony's growing discomfort with British taxes had produced a situation that had forced London to send more and more troops to the New World, particularly to Boston, which was becoming an occupied city. A scuffle between anxious Bostonians and British troops in March of 1770 became a spark that lit the fuse to all-out rebellion. During the name-calling, someone fired a gun. The troops fired into the crowd. A black man, Crispus Attucks, was the first to fall, the first casualty of the Revolutionary War. Then 5 others fell. 6 more were badly wounded. Urged on by an advocate of revolution who did his work from the sidelines, Samuel Adams, a Boston silversmith, Paul Revere, commemorated the events in an etching that was soon spread round the colonies. The encounter became known as the Boston Massacre. In 1773, the colonists dumped British tea into the Boston harbor to protest taxes. That would quickly be called the Boston Tea Party. Enter Thomas Paine, a new American. Born in Britain, he had come to the New World with some help from Benjamin Franklin, who recognized Paine as a firebrand journalist who needed a new challenge. Paine came to America just 2 years before the Revolution. Within weeks, he sized up the situation and realized the time was ripe for true revolution. The colonists simply needed a kick in the pants. So Paine wrote and published a pamphlet called Common Sense. These few pages were reprinted with amazing speed and distributed throughout the colonies. Paine, a Britisher, had been able to see through the complexities of the time. His words inspired a revolution. The existing governmental system that offered the colonies a chance to share their thoughts was the ineffective Continental Congress, but it did provide a sense of unity. Debates on the floor were loud and acrimonious. Massachusetts was in the forefront of demanding liberty, with the likes of Sam Adams pushing the hardest. But perhaps the most outspoken founding father was a Boston area lawyer, who of all people was the successful lawyer for the British troops at the Boston Massacre, future President John Adams. As debate in the Second Continental Congress focused on the question of sovereignty, it would take one man to say what everyone was thinking. Virginia's Richard Henry Lee. He offered a resolution that the colonies should separate from England. That was a month before the official statement. To write a Declaration of Independence, the Congress, of course, set up a committee. John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and a few others. Adams was asked to write it, but said, "No, I'm prone to be a radical. People don't like me." Thomas Jefferson, a delegate from Virginia, another future president, was only 33 when he wrote the famous words. The full convention mulled over Jefferson's language, changing paragraphs, taking out references to slavery, simply tweaking. On July 2nd, the group agreed, and John Adams wrote that July the 2nd would always be a day of parades and fireworks from one ocean to the other. He was only off by 2 days. On July 4th, the final I's were dotted and T's were crossed, and the complete declaration was copied and read throughout the land. Common men had created a new concept, that freedom belonged to the people. It was their God-given gift, and no government could give it or take it away. The bloody fight to bring fruition to Jefferson's words would take nearly 7 years and cost 25,000 lives. Washington pleaded with Congress for supplies, for food, more men. He was largely ignored. And in the end, it was George Washington's personality and his ability to lead men that won our freedom. But the newly freed land was slow to exercise those freedoms. The peace was as much a fight as was the war. The British returned in 1812. Americans would fight again, this time against each other in the Civil War. American GIs would carry arms around the world, and millions more would die. But nothing is gained without a price. Sacrifice is the currency of freedom. Jefferson's experiment is a work that is unfinished, and it continues today.